Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome back to what I believe is actually going to be our last video on the Odyssey, where we cover the rest of Homer's epic poem to its conclusion. In the last video, we basically finished up the second section of the three sections that we split the Odyssey up into for this class. We split that section up into two videos and we finished it up right at the point where Odysseus actually returns home to Ithaca and meets Telemachus for the first time, his son, after 20 years. And they begin to start preparing a little bit for the retaking of Ithaca back from the suitors. This last section is going to be comprised of books 17 to, I believe it's not all the way up to 24. You know, there are 24 books in Odyssey. It's only 23. So we're going to do, I think, yeah, books tw 17, I think it's 22 and then 23. Because that's effectively for our purposes where the major important points we've been tracking kind of reach their conclusion. So let's jump right in. And we're going to begin with this summary passage right here. It says, Telemachus returns home, and Odysseus and the swineherd soon follow. Odysseus is still disguised as a beggar. Okay, so really kind of simple recap from where we left off in book 16. We see that Telemachus knowingly goes ahead and kind of, presents himself as being unsuccessful in his search for his father. He goes and meets the suitors. He tells his mother he didn't find anything, etc., etc. Behind him, quite a ways, comes the disguised Odysseus and Eumaeus the swineherd. And upon his entrance into Ithaca, obviously, or his former home in Ithaca, no one's really going to recognize him at all, except for one character that we can kind of reference on the side. I should say two characters actually, and that's actually what this whole book and this section are all about. Now, a couple things that are, or one thing at least that's kind of interesting to note is that Odysseus's disguise here is something that's become very famous from this story. The idea of this man entering into his home disguised as a beggar while he, in fact, is the true lord and master of the household. And all of his servants are either being abused, are being mistreated, or are misbehaving themselves. And these men who were effectively his subjects, these noblemen of Ithaca, are also severely, deeply misbehaving in his own home and dishonoring him so much. He is able to come in and see this firsthand under a disguise. This motif, in other words, this reoccurring feature of a disguised person or of a god or of some greater person in disguise coming down and coming into our midst and being able to see us in a much more intimate way is a very typical motif, not just for Greek mythology, but also for Norse mythology. I think, of course, of Odin, the king of the gods, who takes on the form of a beggar. We see this really played up in fantasy quite often, right? The wizards or the old figures, whether it's Yoda or Gandalf, actually are much, much more than they appear. We see this in a much more like overtly religious context, right? With the idea of Jesus of Nazareth being literally God incarnate. We even see it in other biblical sources, like where the angels in I think Sodom and Gomorrah come down and are actually angels. They're not just, they're not just human beings. They are effectively celestial, divine spirits. So once again, we have the Odyssey kind of connecting with a lot of deeper moods, or not deeper motifs, I should say, deeper motifs and deeper patterns of storytelling right here. Now, I love and hate this particular book, book 17, because it it really highlights something interesting about Homer as an author, but it also is just such a punch in the feels because Odysseus in this particular book actually is reunited with someone that does recognize him in his house, but it's not who we would expect. It's not actually his wife. It's not even his servant. It's none of the other people or his, friends or family. It's none of that. It's his dog, actually. It's his dog Argos. Or Argos. So let's read really quickly as this disguised Odysseus is approaching what happens with his dog. So Homer writes, while he spoke, an old hound lying near picked up his ears, or pricked up his ears, and lifted up his muzzle. This was Argos, trained as a puppy by Odysseus, but never taken on a hunt before his master sailed for Troy. The young men afterwards hunted wild goats with him, and hare and deer, but he had grown old in his master's absence. Treated as rubbish now, he lay at last upon a mass of dung before the gates. Upon a mass of dung before the gates, manure of mules and cows, piled there until field hands could spread it on the king's estate. Abandoned there and half destroyed with flies, old Argos lay. Okay, so Odysseus's dog, which he knew of, or at least he raised 20 years ago is still alive and is sitting outside the walls of Ithaca, outside the doors and gates of Ithaca. And he is seated in this pile of dung, in this pile of crap, basically, being kind of destroyed by flies and being half eaten. He looks like one of those, very sad AMC commercials about the animals in shelters that need our help on Christmas time. It's that kind of an image, right? Ouch, really a miserable kind of incredibly empathetic or sympathetic image of this poor dog that's being abused fundamentally. Now, the fact that Odysseus is coming near and I assume kind of speaking or at least saying something, and Argos is able to kind of recognize him through the disguise that Athena has put on him is of course very sweet and very interesting too. It kind of shows again that the animals, or just something we usually see in literature, is that the animals have kind of an innate, more kind of intuitive, divine sense, or sense of the supernatural or the emotions that humans necessarily don't. So he recognizes Odysseus, and then we get this next section. But when he knew he heard Odysseus's voice nearby, he did his best to wag his tail, nose down, with flattened ears, having no strength to move nearer his master. And the man looked away, wiping a salt tear from his cheek, but he hid this from Eumaeus. Then he said, I marvel that they leave this hound to lie here on the dung pile. He would have been a fine dog from the look of him, though I can't say as to his power and speed when he was young. You find the same good build in house dogs, table dogs, landowners keep all for style. In other words, he's saying this dog is being left here to rot, and I'm kind of surprised at that because he looks like he would have been such a good dog. Why didn't they take care of him, right? Now, for number two here, the question here is asking, what do other characters find so sad about Argos? This passage right here and the one right beneath it are going to express that, which is that this dog has such immense potential, right? And there's a little bit of mythological, fantasy elements here, because if Odysseus had seen Argos 20 years ago, that means that Argos is what, 140 years old at minimum in dog years. He's over that pretty well if Odysseus knew him, well enough past his simple puppy days. So like he's what, 170, 147 years old. That's crazy. That's impossible, basically. But it's part of the mythology, it's part of the kind of grand epicness of the story. And it plays into the sadness here, which is that this potential that this dog, this living being had was so great, and he's being so mistreated. He's being so wasted here. Okay. And you replied, Eumaeus, a hunter owned him, but the man is dead in some far place. If this old hound could show the form he had when Lord Odysseus left him going to Troy, you'd see him swift and strong. He never shrank from any savage thing he'd brought to bay in the deep woods. On the scent, no other dog came up with him. Now misery has him in leash. His owner died abroad, and here the women's slaves will take no care of him. You know how servants are. Without a master, they have no will to labor or excel. For Zeus, who views the wide world, takes away half the manhood of a man that day he goes into captivity and slavery. So, Argos basically, because of number one, the length of time, and also just the falling into ruins of Ithaca after Odysseus has left, Argos is basically left to wither away and as we're going to see, just continue to suffer and not be able to live in the kind of glory that he could have lived in, right? He's a huge symbol, if you want, for number three, of wasted potential, the wasted potential of life of the people on Ithaca as well. And I think more directly here, he's also a symbol of the state that Ithaca is in right now. He is symbolic of Ithaca itself. It could be this kind of vibrant, very full of life, full of joy, full of energy, and passionate kind of place with this, wonderful ruler Odysseus, his beautiful, loving wife, and then his, amazing son who wants to grow up and be just like him, all this kind of stuff. It could have been all this sort of stuff, but it's not. It's been left in decay. It's been ravaged. It's been completely demolished by these awful people, these awful suitors. And we see that exemplified in how this dog, this amazing dog, is being treated, right? So he says all this. And by the way, he throws in a couple interesting points here about the servants. Like he's saying the servants, have no will to excel when the master's not home. So he's kind of saying, your servants have stopped really trying all that much because you're not here. And it's like fair enough. I mean, that's part of human nature, right? We see that, of course, um, not just in the workplace, but even in the classroom, right? Like if there's no teacher in the classroom, are many of the students going to be doing all their work, or are they going to keep up with doing their work for very long? Probably not, right? All humans are kind of like that. Just like if you took your employer away, you wouldn't be doing that much work. But Homer throws in one of these famous passages here, where he says, "For Zeus views the wide world, takes away half the manhood of a man. That day he goes into captivity and slavery." Now, that is what a quiet condemnation of slavery, or at least a criticism of slavery that we see here, what, over 2,000 years ago? That's pretty interesting. And what's interesting actually is if you go and take our humanities course, or you watch my humanities course, I think it's in the video where we discuss slavery for the 1800s. One of the biggest anti-slavery and biggest abolitionist advocates in America, Thaddeus Stevens, actually mentions this passage in one of his speeches to Congress condemning slavery. So he says, like, even the Greeks, like even Homer was saying, like, look, it's a bad institution. It takes away half of your dignity, half of your manhood. It's not a good thing, right? It's not a good thing to be a slave. And I think he even like just naturally kind of he being Homer and Homer's contemporaries naturally kind of understood that. So it's interesting, right? We see that what I usually say in class is that values in history and the state of rights that we have in history are not always as like a clear-cut straight line where like, oh my God, it just was terrible and then it got a lot better. It's like it was a little bit more in flux than that. Some people did very clearly have the insight um, that slavery was wrong, right? That this is bad. This is a bad situation, and we should maybe not praise it. At the very least, it's not a great situation, at least in terms of how the Greeks were practicing their slavery, right? So interesting. Now, last passage here, in trigger warning for the feels, because what's about to happen. Eumaeus crossed the court and went straight forward into the Megaron among the suitors. But death and darkness, in that instance, closed the eyes of Argos, who had seen his master Odysseus after 20 years. So what happens? Odysseus sees the dog. He kind of cries a little bit, laments how he's been treated. The dog recognizes Odysseus. He kind of lifts himself up just as much as he can. He wags his tail and he dies, having seen his master one last time. That's so sad. It's like I can't believe, and I was reading this for the first time. I remember just being like, why? Like, why did Homer put that in there? That's just so sad. But it's a very kind of emotionally sort of moving scene. And there was recently a movie, I think it was last year, that came out starring Ray Fiennes, The Return, about this whole part of the Odyssey. I haven't seen the movie in full, but I did see this scene, right, where he sees Argos, and it kind of captures some of the mood of this particular scene of when this poor dog just dies upon seeing Odysseus. Okay, so there's a very kind of sad entrance into this situation. Now, in terms of mood and setup here, what's Homer doing? I think Homer is kind of doing what the creators of The Lion King or the animators of like The Prince of Egypt did in the kind of iconic scenes where our characters, our heroes, return home to where they need to right some wrong that is being done. So obviously in The Lion King, we know that Simba has to come back to Pride Rock and defeat Scar. And what happens before that? He doesn't just kind of come in and challenge Scar. He comes in and you have this dramatic moments in The Lion King where he sees the wasteland that Pride Rock has become. That's exactly what's being done here. The Prince of Egypt, it was him coming back to Egypt and seeing the enslavement of the Jews in a much different light and how terrible situation it was. Same thing here. We're seeing how awful everything is being kept in his home in the 20 years since he's been gone. So, the next summary passage is this. Odysseus enters his home as a beggar, and the suitors mock and abuse him. Penelope asks to speak with the beggar, but Odysseus puts her off until nightfall. So, an interesting scene here. Odysseus is mistreated by the suitors. This is further characterization of them as, I think, among at least the top three villains of this entire story. Because notice what they're doing, as we discussed in one of our very first videos on the Odyssey. They are mistreating not just Odysseus's family and his servants and disrespecting him and, being terrible guests like this and abusing the hospitality laws. Now they're abusing an elder guest in his home, right? A beggar who's kind of coming in there and who's the guest of at least one of the people there, and he's in the home, and you're mistreating someone in someone else's home. It's a huge sign of disrespect, particularly because he's an elder, but even more so because it's in someone's house. This is a good, rule of thumb, ladies and gents. You don't want to insult someone while you are the guest in someone else's home, right? You want to be on your best behavior when you're in someone else's home. You want to be behaving properly, not making people upset, all this kind of stuff. And particularly if it's another guest, right? You don't want to make another guest feel uncomfortable, like these guys are here. Now, Penelope wants to talk to this guy, this beggar, this Odysseus in disguise. Odysseus won't talk to her until nightfall. Now, in book 21, we skip over it, but I highly encourage you to go watch I think it's like the 1980s, 1990s version of the Odyssey, where we see it's like a long series by the, or it's like a long film. It's like about what, 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. Most high school classes will show it. I saw it back when I was in fifth grade. It still holds up to this day. It's still an interesting movie. But particularly for this scene, I think it does this scene really, really well, where Penelope actually goes and sees the beggar Odysseus. And it's a wonderful moment of what we would call dramatic irony, right? Where we as the audience know what's going on here, but the character, or at least one character on stage, does not, right? Penelope does not know that this is Odysseus. He, of course, knows that it's Penelope, it's his wife, and he's not going to say anything. So why is he talking to her? Let's see. I think the summary here actually does a good job just getting that basic point straightforward. So it says in books 18 to 20, Odysseus observes the suitors and finds that two in particular, Antinous and Eurymachus, are rude and demanding. Okay, again, rude is a very kind of high school understatement here. They are being a lot worse than rude. They're incredibly dishonorable. They're abusive. They're just absolute scumbags and deeply immoral people by the standards of, I think, our days and definitely by the days of the Greeks. Penelope asks Odysseus the beggar for news of her husband. So again, in this nighttime meeting, she's like, "Have you seen my husband? Have you heard anything about him?" He says that he has heard that Odysseus is on his way home. So again, go watch the movie. It's fantastic. But Odysseus says, "Yes, he is coming. He will come to rescue you. Don't worry, he will come." And Penelope, however, has given up hope for Odysseus's return. She proposes an archery contest to the suitors with marriage to her as the prize. So before we get to that, we're skipping a lot around a lot here. It's a very, again, emotionally kind of moving moment for the character. We're going to see this actually here for Penelope because she has held out for around 10 years, fundamentally waiting for Odysseus, right? We can kind of subtract 10 years because she knew that he was fighting in Troy, that the war was going on. But once the war had ended and people were coming home, she was like, okay, so Odysseus is going to come home any day now. He didn't. So after that, it's been 10 years and she's been fighting off the suitors, trying to get them away and protect her, her son, and the kingdom that they had built together. But now she tells the beggar, I don't think I believe you. I think he's gone, and I am pretty much at my wit's end here. And we can't blame her for that. But as we're going to see, the emotions that she's going through here, if you actually look at her intention, look at her emotions a little bit, this reveals a lot about Penelope and shows us that she's still an incredibly noble and admirable character in the story. So she tells him this. And again, she goes away. She doesn't realize that it's Odysseus. And then we get the next day the famous, probably one of the top like most famous images of this entire poem, which is the archery contest for Penelope's hand in marriage. And as we're going to see, the archery contest is simply this. If you can take Odysseus's bow, that was his hunting. I think it was his hunting and his I think it was his war bow as well, but it's definitely the one that he would use for hunting. If you can take this and if you can string it, which is hard, by the way, it's a very difficult task to string someone's bow in the ancient world, or to string any bow in the ancient world, right? And if you can shoot it through 12 axe heads, which probably means like either the holes at the end of the axes or the kind of hollow parts that blacksmiths usually make in between the axe blades. If you can shoot it through 12 of those, then I will marry you. Okay. So that's the tension now. Are they going to be able to do this? How is Odysseus going to be able to stop this contest, or at least stop these men from potentially stealing his wife? And also, how is he going to be able to rid his home of them? And that again is bringing up, if you forgot, one of the main driving points and driving kind of demands that was put on Odysseus, or I should say, tasks that was laid in front of Odysseus. You'll remember in book, what was it, 11, when he met Tiresias, that part of Tiresias's prophecy to Odysseus was that he has to remove the suitors. He has to deal out death and blood to every single one of them to a man. You can't let any of them live. You need to have them all be dead if you ever want to have the happily ever after, the kind of happy ending of your kingdom. So he's trying to do that right now, obviously. Now, we begin here. Now the queen reached the storeroom door and halted. So she's coming in, she's going to grab the bow and present the challenge to the suitors. Here was an oaken sill, cut long ago, and sanded lean and bedded true. Four square the door jambs and the shining doors were set by the careful builder. Penelope untied the strap around the curving handle and pushed her hook into the slit, aiming at the bolts inside, and shot them back. Then came a rasping sound as those bright doors the key had sprung, sorry, as those bright doors the key had sprung gave way. A bellow like a bull's vault in a meadow, followed by her light footfall entering over the plank floor. Herb-scented robes lay there in chests, but the lady's milk-white arms went up to lift the bow down from the peg into the old polished bow case. So I love this scene, even kind of the end. It's very dramatic, right? Like Homer definitely had like a cinematic mind where you get Penelope unclamping this storeroom, this kind of what is assumed to be this very, very heavily guarded storeroom that probably wasn't opened if very much, if at all, since Odysseus had gone to Troy. She opens it and it like, creaks open and it's got this like dead silence to it. So it's like hasn't been open since he was there. She comes in and she grabs the bow. And again, this is meant, I think, symbolically to be kind of, at least symbolically or with the mood of the scene, to demonstrate that we have reached a breaking point with her, right? This has not been open since Odysseus had left, and she probably didn't intend it to be used or at least accessed until he returned. And yet she is now breaking the seal. She's breaking the lock. She's going in. She's like, okay, I need to end this besiegement of the suitors, and I need to select a new husband. So now Penelope sank down, holding the weapon on her knees, and drew her husband's great bow out, and sobbed and bit her lip and let the salt tears flow. Okay, it's three lines, but I think it's very telling. For this first question, number one, how is Penelope characterized? Well, again, because we haven't really been focusing on her too much, some students will misread this and think that, well, she's kind of giving up, right? She's giving up her faith in Odysseus. She's not being faithful, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you got to remember, again, it's been 20 years, and she's been waiting at least 10 of those years for him to return. And she's been besieged and pressured by these abhorrent men to marry her, essentially. Now, you could still say that she's strong. I think. I don't think. I think I know, right? She's definitely strong here. She's also, in some sense, extremely what would you want to say? Not empathetic, but she's someone we could really empathize with because she's sitting here and she's crying about the whole situations, which tells us, guys, is she actually unfaithful to Odysseus here? No, she does not want this to happen. She wants to be with him only. Okay. So she's still loyal. She's still very strong, but she's also desperate. She's in kind of a really desperate situation. She just is emotionally being overwhelmed by this. So she grabs the bow and she comes back out. Then back she went to face the crowded hall, tremendous bow in hand, and on her shoulder hung the quiver spiked with coughing death. That is, of course, the arrows. Behind her, maids bore a basket full of axe heads, bronze and iron implements for the master's game. Thus, in her beauty, she approached the suitors, and near a pillar of solid roof, she paused, her shining veil across her cheeks. Her maids on either side, I'm sorry, on either hand and still, then spoke to the banqueters. My lords, hear me, suitors indeed. So she's going to speak. So again, set up the scene really quickly before we read her speech to the suitors. She is coming out. She got all of her maids with her. They got all the equipment ready for the challenge. And she's kind of standing, I would assume, kind of on a dais or in a doorway to speak to all of them. So you have this woman, the woman of the house, the queen of the queen of the kingdom here, speaking to all of these noblemen and suitors who want to marry her. She says, My lords, hear me. Suitors indeed, you commandeered this house to feast and drink in day and night, my husband being long gone, long out of mind. You found no justification for yourselves, none except your lust to marry me. Stand up then. We now declare a contest for that prize. Before we get to the contest, again, look at that speech. That is a breathtaking speech if we consider the historical context of where we are right now. This is very much a patriarchal, a kind of a situation or a civilization where men are the dominant gender, sex, in power right now. And yet we see here Homer is putting this woman, Penelope, in a position where she is able to stand up to and look down and speak down to all of the noblemen here. Now, in terms of social hierarchy, she technically does have more power than because she is the queen, but she is, again, part of that patriarchal system. She has lost, or she is very much in danger of losing the majority of her power because she has no husband, because her husband's gone and she has to remarry. So even still, she sits here and she says what? I love that kind of that phrase, suitors indeed, right? That's very sarcastic. She's saying, yeah, 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 really great men you are. You commandeered this home to feast and drink and day and night, my husband being long gone, long out of mind. In other words, you came in here and you have destroyed and abused the laws and customs of hospitality. You are dishonorable. It's essentially what she just said. You are just dishonorable men. You found no justification, no excuse, in other words, for yourselves, none except your lust to marry me. You are just lusting after me. You don't actually love me. You don't respect anything about me except how beautiful I am. You just want to have sex with me. That's basically it. It's what she's saying. So again, kind of echoing what we talked about with Circe. You boys are just pigs. You are dishonorable pigs, essentially is what she's saying here. Stand up then. I now declare the contest for that prize. In other words, yeah, okay, you want to marry me. Here's the context, or here's the contest, rather. So, I mean, for number two, how does this tone characterize her? Now we get that kind of very strong, very noble, very moral, actually, very dignified, um, and assertive. I think very assertive aspect to Penelope. She is really kind of, I think, showing us a serious degree of strength when she's able to stand up to what is effectively her abusers here and talk down to them essentially and set the conditions, also set the conditions for her marriage. That again is a very kind of um feminine empowering move that Homer throws in here, that it is the woman who sets the what would you want to say, sets the qualifications for, sets the groundwork for how you are actually going to marry her. Now, again, that's very noteworthy because, again, in the ancient world, that's not how it goes. Usually, if you're someone's daughter, or you have either a family member or some kind of male who's ruling over you, he gets to decide who you're going to get to marry, and that's it. That's pretty much it. She, however, is the one saying, "No, I'm going to decide. If you want to marry me, here's what you got to do." So we see here, again, I think Homer using feminine power in the more classical way that it was used, which is not as a kind of overt force, kind of mirroring more classically masculine traits of power. We actually see her using the more tactful and the more um, classically feminine uses of power. Needing to use her intelligence, needing to use her wisdom. Again, why do I highlight this so much? Because we have to remember whose wife is this? This is Odysseus's wife. And I'm going to say this now so we can come back to it in the next, or in the very last book that we're going to cover, which is that something really brilliant that I think Homer does is he gives us, in some sense, a quiet picture of what a good couple looks like, where they are both kind of at the same level. They're actually very, very close in their competence and in their capabilities, despite the differences in gender that, the classical world would have seen. So Penelope here is very strong and is also, as we're going to see, very, very clever as well. So what is the tone? I'm sorry, what is the challenge? Of course, we're going to have it restated here. Here is my lord Odysseus' hunting bow. Bend it and string it if you can. Send an arrow through iron axe helve sockets, 12 in line. I'm sorry, who sends an arrow through iron axe helve sockets, 12 in line? I join my life with his and leave this place, my home, my rich and beautiful bridal house forever, to be remembered, though I dream of it only. Okay, I love that because she's like, fine, yeah, do it if you can, whoever can, then I will join you and leave my home forever. Okay, that tone, I think that last couple line there, she's basically lamenting this whole situation again. She is not happy about this. She is not, on the Bachelorette, looking for, or the Bachelor, looking for her, next dream husband. This is not a good situation for her. And that line there, by the way, though I dream of it only, some of you who are paying close attention will, of course, notice that Homer is echoing what Odysseus said to Calypso. When Calypso wanted him to stay on her island in book five, he said, though I know you're beautiful, but I only dream of Penelope. I dream of her only. I dream of my home only. She's saying the same thing. Okay. Again, I think Homer's kind of making this very nice, even though it's secondary in the plot, sort of, this wonderful little love and romantic connection between the two characters. Okay, next summary here. Despite heating and greasing the bow, the lesser suitors prove unable to string it. The most able suitors, Antinous and Eurymachus, hold off. While the suitors are busy with the bow, Odysseus, still disguised as an old beggar, goes to enlist the aid of two of his trusted servants, Eumaeus the swineherd and Philodius the cowherd. So you got to kind of set this up, and usually I will draw this out for my class. You'll have the main hall, right, of Odysseus' palace, where this whole competition is going on. So you got all the hundreds of suitors inside right now, and you got Penelope and her maids kind of watching, and Telemachus assuming. Actually, I don't think Telemachus is there. I think Telemachus is going to be with Odysseus. They're watching this contest go on, and all the suitors fail at it. Meanwhile, Odysseus, the beggar, is quietly going outside and talking to other servants that he knew in his household. And we're going to skip this a little bit, but I'm going to basically just summarize it for you. He goes and talks to the cowherd and basically says, would you help me? Or would you help Odysseus if he returned home and wanted to deal with these suitors? And the guy just unloads on him. The cowherd just says, he's like, yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely help. I would just, I would die for Odysseus if this could happen, right? If we could do this. And for number three, what do we learn more about Odysseus based on the hypothetical, or the reaction of his servants to his hypothetical return? Well, they're overjoyed. They're like, let's go. We'll fight. Like, we're just going to get up and fight, even if it's like 20 years later since the guy's been gone. Well, I mean, what does that tell you about him as a ruler? You of course can draw the parallels today when we say like, oh, your favorite teacher's coming in, or oh, your favorite adult is coming in the room, or your favorite coach or whatever, and like the whole crowd is like, livid about this, or like not livid, but like elated about this and happy. That tells us that he again was a very good ruler and king, and he had a good relationship with all of these people, even the cowherds, even the swineherds. So what we saw with Telemachus and Eumaeus, the swineherd, and also with Odysseus as well, that good relationship between the upper and lower class, between the ruler and the people he rules, like Odysseus and his men on the boats, right, or on his ships, it's still carried through here. So even the people who are left on Ithaca still are very, very loyal to him. He is a great king. So he and Telemachus and the cowherd and the swineherd all work together. And again, I'm not going to read all of this. I'm like actually going to skip most of this. And they start to plan what they want to do and what does the plan look like so far. He basically has everyone get his weapons that he had stored away, hide them, make sure none of the suitors have their weapons, okay? Or at least like don't have access to these weapons. And for number four, what is Odysseus doing in this passage? How does it characterize him further? It once again kind of emphasizes how he has grown, but how he has also developed his iconic traits of cleverness and strategy, right? So he is conducting warfare here. He is going to conduct his aggressive kind of campaign against the suitors, but he's doing it wisely. He's using his tactfulness and his kind of his desire for home, his loyalty towards home, and his if you want his anger, his righteous anger towards these men. He's actually syncing all those characteristics up very nicely to achieve his goal in harmony. And that I think shows us that he has seriously developed in wisdom and competence as a man. I mean, I think the Odysseus that was caught in Polyphemus's cave would not have been this tactful about it, right? So he's really kind of upped his game since he's been gone. Okay, so next summary point. Odysseus the beggar asks the suitors if he might try the bow. Word that the old man may show them up, they refuse, but Penelope urges them to let Odysseus try. At Telemachus's request, though, Penelope leaves the men to settle the question of the bow among themselves. Two trusted servants lock the doors of the room, and Telemachus orders the bow to be given to Odysseus. So the plan's starting to come together. Odysseus comes in, he's like, let me try. And Penelope's like, yeah, let him try, it's fine. But as he's getting ready to do so, Telemachus is like, Mom, go to your room for a little while. And she does, and the servants go with her. The doors are locked, so now we're inside that main hall with all the suitors. Doors are locked, and Odysseus and his servants now are the only ones who know where the weapons are uh, in the palace right now. Okay. So what's going to happen? I mean, like most of us can kind of see what's going to happen. He's planning the very well-known slaughter of all of these men. But before he does this, of course, I think the more famous scene is about to play out when he actually does take the bow and does what? Let's take a look. Odysseus took his time, turning the bow, tapping it every inch for borings that termites might have made, while the master of the weapon was abroad. The suitors were now watching him, and some jested among themselves. A bow lover, dealer in old bows. Maybe he has one like it at home, or has an itch to make one for himself. See how he handles it, the sly old buzzard. And one disdainful suitor added this: May his fortune grow an inch for every inch he bends it. Okay. So Odysseus, again, in the form of the beggar, is kind of inspecting the bow, making sure that it will still work properly, which shows us again that he is competent. He knows his own stuff. He knows how to be tactful and wise about this sort of thing. And the beggars, of course, mock him, right? And I think Homer is once again doing a little bit of dramatic irony here because, just playing with some comedy here because we as the audience know what's going to happen. Maybe he has one like it at home. He does. It's that one. May his fortune grow for every inch he bends it. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen, actually, right? So they don't really believe, they don't really see any use or any kind of real threat from him. But the man skilled in all ways of contending, satisfied by the great bow's look and heft, like a musician, like a harper, when with quiet hand upon his instrument he draws between his thumb and forefinger a sweet new string upon a peg, so effortlessly Odysseus in one motion strung the bow. Okay, I love that. So he grabs it and like a musician, like a harper, bam, strings it. Okay. Now, what for number six, why does this simile fit well with what we know about Odysseus? Well, the the skill of a musician, the skill of a craftsman, right? The skill of an artist is how he's described as being able to string this bow. It shows us once again his competence and skill in, as the narrator says, in all ways of contending, in all ways of competing, right? He has a incredibly well-rounded range of skills. Stringing his own bow is not least among them. And if you want to go a little bit deeper here, I think you could probably read into the Greek symbolism. The harp is what's his name? Apollo's weapon, or Apollo's instrument, rather. And it is the Apollonian or the Apollo-like symbols are usually symbols of more orderly, more harmonic sort of music and creative energies, creative ideas. So, for example, like an Apollonian or an Apollo-like dance or artwork would usually look like a ballet essentially to us, right? Some very orderly, very structured, not like, like Dionysus's stuff, which is all crazy and very kind of like, mad and chaotic. Or Apollo's much more ordered. And he's also a guy who plays the harp. He's a very kind of refined god. So I think Homer's very clearly making a little bit of an allusion here, a reference to Apollo, not least of all because also Apollo is the god of archery, right? So, you have that connection there as well. So he does this, then slid his right hand down the cord and plucked it. So the taunt gut vibrating, hum and sang a swallow's note. And the hushed hall, it smote the suitors, and all their faces changed. Then Zeus thundered overhead, one loud crack for a sign. So he strings it and he plucks it, makes a little bit of a note, that little like twang note, and everyone is like dead quiet. They're like, "Oh my God, he did it." Zeus lets thunder crack overhead. So apparently the skies were getting dark, and Zeus like throws a lightning bolt or a thunderbolt across the sky, right? And that's just dramatic effect. That's just kind of dramatic effect, right? That's good background mood. And Odysseus even says that. And Odysseus laughed within him that the son of the crooked-minded Kronos, that is Zeus, of course, had flung that omen down. That omen, right? Kind of bad sign. It's like he's like, the thunder like claps as he does this, letting the suitors know if they're paying attention, like something really bad is about to happen to you. So he picked one ready arrow from his table where it lay bare, the rest waiting still in the quiver for the young men's turn to come. He knocked it, let it rest across the hand grip, and drew the string, grooved butt of the arrow, aiming from where he sat upon the stool. Now flashed arrow from twanging bow, clean as a whistle through every socket ring, and grazed not one, to thud with heavy brazen head beyond. All right, so he did it. So he shoots the bow and arrow, bam, and that is the contest won. So theoretically, that means that he has won Penelope's hand in marriage before they will. Now, a couple of things I usually point out here, especially to my male students, is what is the kind of why does this scene so what would you want to say so iconic in the Odyssey? Well, two different reasons. I think it's iconic because it is it's essentially like a rescue, right? One of those unexpected moments again, like what Odysseus's appearance to Telemachus was like. It's similar to that. It's this kind of unexpected happy ending or happy kind of turn of events. Like, oh my gosh, like he shows up and he does it. He's the one to do it. Wow, he saved Penelope from this contest essentially that could have stolen her away from him. Awesome. But it's also kind of a nice symbol, I think, of again that feminine kind of voice or that feminine control, or at least the role of the feminine in selecting a mate, fundamentally, a romantic partner. And what I usually say, like in especially my fantasy class, actually, I mentioned this a lot, how this scene is actually going to make the suitors incredibly uncomfortable because what Penelope is effectively demanding of them is that they demonstrate the same level of competence as her husband. And we get then a very, very classic, very ancient discomfort in men that causes a lot of competition and a lot of fundamentally violence and antagonism between men and women to a degree, so just human beings over selecting a mate and kind of status that you want in order to have better chances at finding a romantic partner. She's basically saying here, yeah, my husband used to be Odysseus, right? He's like up here. Y'all are like down here. So if you want to marry me, you gotta be up here, right? You want the modern equivalent? It's like, my boyfriend or my, ex-husband was, or my husband rather, was able to like, bench press, 405 pounds. And it's like, okay, you want to be, my husband, you got to do as much as that. Good luck, boys. It's like that kind of a situation. Obviously much more tactfully done here. So yeah, she's basically saying, I am quite the catch as a woman, and I had a great husband. So if you really want to be at my level, you got to step up your game. Okay. It's mildly good dating advice too, right? Make sure that you're always trying to improve yourself and make yourself more of a competent and good and moral man that will kind of attract more and more people to you, and vice versa for women too. It's just good dating advice from Homer. Now, as soon as he does this, we get the kind of last lines here. Then quietly Odysseus said, Telemachus, the stranger you welcomed in your hall has not disgraced you. I did not miss, neither did I take all day stringing the bow. My hands and I are sound, not so contemptible as the young men say. The hour has come to cook their lordships' mutton, supper by daylight. Other amusements later, with song and harping that adorn a feast. He dropped his eyes and nodded, and the Prince Telemachus, true son of King Odysseus, belted his sword on, clapped hand on his spear, and with a clank and glitter of keen bronze, stood by his chair in the forefront near his father. Okay. So for number seven, what does Odysseus prove to the younger men? What might Homer be teaching his reader? He's proving to them that just because he was old and not what they expected or not what they kind of expected Odysseus or anyone valuable to look like, he still had a lot of skill and value. So he's teaching his younger men or the younger men here. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover, basically. You should not disrespect the elderly. You shouldn't discount someone's skill just by their appearance. Okay. So here we are at the slaughter of the suitors. So for book number 22, let's read on. And we're going to have a discussion here really quickly as to why the suitors quote unquote need to die, and why Homer puts this in here as an example of heroic behavior. Um, because I think it is meant to be seen as heroic behavior, and we'll talk about why. Okay. So let's take a look. Now, shrugging off his rags, the wiliest fighter of the islands leapt and stood on the broad door still, his own bow in his hands. He poured out at his feet a rain of arrows from the quiver and spoke to the crowd. So much for that. Your clean-cut game is over. Now watch me hit a target that no man has hit before. If I can make this shot, help me, Apollo. So he jumps in front of the door, right? Remember, because all the other doors are locked except this one door, this door kind of frame where he's in. So he's got all the guys, in front of him, locked in this room. He's guarding the door. He's got his bow and arrow. What's he gonna do? He drew to his fist the cruel head of an arrow for Antinous, just as the young man leaned to lift his beautiful drinking cup, embossed, two-handed, golden. The cup was in his fingers, the wine was even at his lips. And did he dream of death? How could he? in that revelry amid his throng of friends. Who would imagine a single foe, though a strong foe indeed, could dare to bring death's pain on him and darkness on his eyes? So, for number one, why does Homer give us this description of Antinous's thoughts before he dies? It's to highlight his arrogance, that he had no he thought he could never he would never have this happen to him. He would never be under threat of death here. He thought he was so secure, so safe, not so much. Okay, so it's again that Greek kind of hatred and fear of arrogance being on display with Antinous's thoughts. Odysseus' arrow hit him under the chin and punched up to the feathers through his throat. Backward and down he went, letting the wine cup fall from his shocked hand. Like pipes, his nostrils jetted crimson runnels, a river of mortal red, and one last kick upset his table, knocking the bread and meat to soak in dusty blood. Now, as they craned to see their champion where he lay, the suitors jostled in uproar down the hall, everyone on his feet. Wildly they turned and scanned the walls in the long room for arms, but not a shield, not a good ashen spear was there for a man to take and throw. All they could do was yell in outrage at Odysseus. Foul to shoot a man. That was your last shot. Your own throat will be slit for this. I'm sorry, our finest lad is down. You killed the best on Ithaca. Buzzards will tear your eyes out. For they imagined, as they wished, that it was a wild shot, an unintending kill. Fools not to comprehend that they were already in the grip of death. Okay? So Homer gives us a very typical, violent, very anticlimactic, very not very glorious and cinematic death for the kind of lead suitor here. Right, he gets shot in the throat, and he's like gasping up blood, and like blood's coming out of his mouth, and he just like trips over a table and falls and dies. Again, kind of Homer highlighting number one, violence ain't pretty, right? Violence and stuff is not that glorious. It's quite ugly. It's quite grotesque. Also, again, he's also highlighting what happened with the guy in the underworld, right? Odysseus's man who died in Circe's halls that he met in the underworld. Again, this idea of death not necessarily, or kind of like sudden death, not being a very glorious and honorable thing that you might have. So for Antinous' and from his perspective, like he probably didn't expect to die like that in this very kind of pathetic way, which but that's in fact how he dies, right? So yeah, sorry for Antinous. Now, all the other guys are like, that must have been a an accident, right? That was definitely an accident. You old man, you fool, like that was terrible. Like, you're gonna die for this. Now, for number two, how are the suitors characterized as fools here? Because they don't realize what's happening. They don't realize what this guy is intending. They think he just kind of accidentally shoots Antinous. That's what they hope, Homer says, right? So yeah, they're really becoming kind of desperate here, or they're going to become even more desperate, as we're going to see. But glaring under his brows, Odysseus answered, "You yellow dogs, you thought I'd never make it home from the land of Troy. You took my house to plunder, twisted my maids to serve your beds. You dared bid for my wife while I was still alive. Contempt was all you had for the gods who rule the wide heaven. Contempt for what men say of you hereafter. Your last hour has come. You die in blood." Okay, so number three, how does Odysseus characterize these men, and what do you think he means by contempt? Okay. Mm, This is very important, and it goes to the discussion. It's important to the discussion of what I was mentioning earlier, which is Odysseus is about to slaughter all of these men. They don't have weapons to fight back. At least not enough weapons to fight back. Is this heroic that he's about to execute, fundamentally, murder, if you want, all of these men? There's 100 men. Well, most students, like when I was in high school, most students in my classroom will usually jump and say, no, that's not very heroic. That's pretty brutal. I would encourage you to look at it from the Greek's perspective, or just look at it from the text's perspective. And Odysseus kind of reminds us of that here, and Homer reminds us of that here. What is it that these men have done? They have, if we go through the list that Odysseus lists out, is what? They assumed he was going to die. Okay. It's kind of implied that they wished he would die. They wished that he were gone. You took his house. You plundered his house. That alone is in the Greek kind of culture is grounds for pretty severe punishment right there. You plundered someone else's house, especially your king's house, right? Twisted my maids to serve your beds. That's rape, right? They raped the maids. Okay. Now, I would throw in here additionally, they also plotted to murder Odysseus' son. They were planning to kill Telemachus. Okay. You dared bid for my wife's hand while I was still alive. No, you didn't know that I was dead, and you still tried to steal my wife away. Okay. Again, that's wrong, right? You should have at least found some proof or likelihood that he was dead before you started trying to get his wife. Okay. Pretty awful. So all of those things, are those grounds for capital punishments? In the ancient world, heck yeah, absolutely, right? Like, even in the medieval world, if you do that kind of stuff to someone who is, a lord or a king, absolutely, right? Absolutely grounds for death. Now, in our more, contemporary moral sentiments, are these grounds for capital punishment? Some people would say maybe not. The rape thing definitely makes people want to say, yeah, like that's pretty grotesque. It's like one of the worst things you could do to somebody, obviously. So that's pretty awful right there. The planned murder of Telemachus, of someone's son, go ask your parents what they would want done if someone were plotting to murder you, right? Like it's a pretty grotesque thing. So all of that kind of, if I'm not trying to obviously push you towards one answer or the other. Have the debate amongst yourselves, of course. And I won't tell you what I personally think. All I'm trying to do here in a very devil's advocate kind of way is show you that there is nuance to this. There is actually quite an interesting debate to be had here. One interpretation, however, that I will remind you of is how we are interpreting this myth as symbolically representing our experiences of life. So again, Odysseus is trying to establish his happily ever after, his home and his peace and his fulfillment in life, as we've been talking about since the beginning. Well, Tiresias mentioned that, you need to get rid of the suitors, you need to kill the suitors. What could the suitors be symbols of? I don't remember if I discussed this in the first book or not, but I think it's or the first video, but I think it's pretty clear that the suitors are symbols of dysfunctional behavior in your household, whether within you, or if not just your entire household, right? They are behavior that is immoral, that is dysfunctional, that is dishonorable, and that is sacrilegious, if you want to be more religious about it. So, we were talking about how um, dangerous and dysfunctional it is to profane the sacred in the episode with Helios's cattle. Well, this is similar to that, right? So symbolically, the suitors represent dysfunction in your home or in your life. Now, you can see the equation then. If you guys want a happier or much more fulfilling life, what do you need to do with that dysfunction? You need to symbolically, figuratively, kill it. You need to remove it from your life. And so I think here that's the most sympathetic interpretation I can probably give it is that he is being tasked with removing those villains, those monsters from his life if he ever wants peace, right? That's, by the way, another interesting note here is that Homer ends the Odyssey with not some great climactic battle with like Poseidon or Polyphemus. He ends it with this battle with men in his own home, right? So it's a battle with the dysfunction of human nature, the dysfunction of men that we are trying to kind of confront, which you've already been struggling with Odysseus himself, with his men, etc. But we see the kind of climax of that right here as he's killing, as he's confronting these horrible men and killing them. Okay. And the last point here, guys, contempt was all you had for the gods rule the wide heaven. These boys don't really respect the gods at all. They wouldn't be behaving like this if they really respected the gods. Okay. And they don't respect, I love this phrase, what men say of you hereafter. They have no real concern for how other people perceive them in society or in history. It's almost as if they think that no one really is going to remember them. No one really will care to remember them, right? They have no sense of what, authors will call eternity, right? They have no sense of their own posterity, their own, what's the phrase that kids love to use these days? Legacy, right? They don't have any concern for that at all. Should you? Yeah. Yeah, 100%. You should absolutely have concern for your legacy or what people will say about you, because it's a reflection of how you actually are. If it's not completely accurate, it's very much somewhat of a reflection of how you behaved or how you conducted your life. Uh, these boys don't have that. And so, as you can see, they live a really, really awful life. Okay. So they're going to die. Okay. Now, let's see. I think we can skip a bit here because we're going to see he kills Eumaeus then. And we get an interesting moment where, yeah, I'm sorry, Eurymachus, not Eumaeus. Eurymachus tries to step up and appease Odysseus and say, look, he made us do it. Antinous made us do this. He pressured us to do this. So what is Eurymachus trying to do here? He's trying to shift blame off of himself. He's trying to kind of provide some kind of excuse of, my dysfunctions or our dysfunctional behavior is because someone else made me do it. Someone else put me in this terrible situation. He made me do it somehow. Now, again, is that true? Probably not. Almost definitely not in this guy's case. And Odysseus, as it says here, number five, doesn't really answer Eurymachus. He just says, what? Not for the whole treasure of your fathers, all you enjoy, lands, flocks, or any gold put up by others, will I hold my hand. There will be killing till the score is paid. You forced yourselves upon this house. Fight your way out or run for it if you think you'll escape death. I doubt one man of you skims by. So he's basically saying, I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to these kind of fake rhetorical appeals. It's a really, again, slimy move. Like the guy's just a liar now. He's just cynical. He's just kind of saying, no, no, I swear we didn't do it, Odysseus. I swear it wasn't this. And this is like, dude, you're lying. You're a liar. I'm not even going to justify that response or that statement with any real response. So why does he not fully answer them? Because he shouldn't. Because he knows he's dealing with liars and a straight up lie. Okay. Eurymachus is like, oh, okay, I guess we got to fight. So he tries to fight him. He dies, and the fighting continues until we get this last passage here, one of these last passages. Revulsion, anguish in his heart, with both feet kicking out, he downed his chair. Oh, sorry, then it was another guy who died. So then we keep going on. Telemachus jumps into battle. He starts to kill some of the suitors and help defend his father as well. And additionally, we see that the swineherd and the cowherd, with all their planning with Odysseus, are able to provide Odysseus and Telemachus more weapons, more munitions, basically, so that they can do this safely. Okay. Now, again, we're going to skip all the details there. We don't really need to read all the slaughter stuff. But I do want to read this kind of concluding summary passage after they have fought the suitors for a bit. It says the suitors make various unsuccessful attempts to expel Odysseus from his post at the door. Athena urges Odysseus on to battle, yet holds back her fullest aid, waiting for Odysseus and Telemachus to prove themselves. Six of the suitors attempt an attack on Odysseus, but Athena deflects their arrows. Odysseus and his men seize the opportunity to launch their own attack, and the suitors begin to fall. So again, Athena, being the patron here, helps him out, but wants to see that he's proving himself. Okay, once again, seeing that very typical behavior of the gods from earlier in this poem and even right now. Like, we still want you to prove yourselves, right? You can't just let us do everything for you. At last, Athena's presence becomes known to all, as the shape of her shield becomes visible above the hall. The suitors recognize the interventions of the gods on Odysseus' behalf and are frantic to escape, but to no avail. Odysseus and his men are compared to falcons who show no mercy to the flocks of birds they pursue and capture. Soon the room is reeked with blood. Thus the battle with the suitors comes to an end, and Odysseus prepares himself to meet Penelope. Okay, so he, with the help of Athena and his son and his servants, kill everyone. Every one of the suitors is dead. Nobody's harmed on his side, and we have a clear victory here. So, number seven is an expansion of what we were just talking about. Overall, why could we argue that Odysseus' actions here are moral and heroic? Why might we not? Why does Homer most likely think the killing of the suitors is the right thing to do? Um, Fundamentally, guys, I think he as an author thinks that it's right because of, like we discussed, his own understanding of morals and customs of the time, of your what your reverent behavior should be like, and how bad these boys actually were, and also at a symbolic level, what they represent and how they need to be removed from Odysseus's life if our main goals are going to be achieved here. Okay, so they're dead. Now, book 23. Here is where we get the conclusion. It's an important conclusion because we're going to wrap up the whole story here. So Odysseus had all the room or had the room kind of sealed off where all the, the dead bodies are and all the blood is being cleaned. Meanwhile, he is preparing himself, he's cleaning himself up to see Penelope at last. We get this beautiful passage. Great-hearted Odysseus, home at last, was being bathed now by Eurynome and rubbed with golden oil, and clothed again in a fresh tunic and a cloak. Athena lent him beauty, head to foot. She made him taller and massive too, with crisping hair in curls like petals of wild hyacinth. I think that's how you say it, hyacinth, right? But all red golden. Think of a gold infused on silver by a craftsman whose fine art Hephaestus taught him, or Athena, one whose work moves to delight. Just so she lavished beauty over Odysseus's head and shoulders. He sat them in the same chair by the pillar. Sorry, he sat then in the same chair by the pillar, facing his silent wife, and said, pause, and said what? Well, we'll see for a minute. But number one, how can we interpret what the gods are doing or have done to Odysseus symbolically here? Well, this is, if you're really paying attention, this is the fulfillment of the conversation we had in Circe's halls about transfiguration, right? We discussed how you can depict transfiguration in a kind of stagnant or kind of like a lateral level, like you just change your shape into something human-like or like yourself, or you devolve into a beast, into a monster, or you evolve. And I asked, what would that actually look like? Homer answers that question here at last. He shows Odysseus being transfigured into something much more beautiful and much more kind of fulfilled and or full of life and much more powerful than what he was before. So what have the gods done to him? They have changed him. They have helped him grow and become more of who he was meant to be. Okay? So in some sense, if you want to really linger on that for a minute, that in some sense is part of, I think, or at least I think part of the one of the main purposes of life that this story was exploring is, what is the point of this long journey? And part of the point of it was to grow yourself, was to become more than what you are, right? Odysseus was not perfect, was not, done growing at the end of the Trojan War. He needed to kind of continue to grow up and mature before he could come home and experience, as we're going to see, his happily ever after, which I think is one of the main purposes of life, one of the main goals of life. Um, and so we see him begin to achieve that here. So he says to his wife, "Strange woman, the immortals of Olympus made you hard, harder than any. Who else in the world would keep aloof as you do from her husband if he returned to her from the years of trouble? Cast on his own land in the 20th year? Nurse, make up a bed for me to sleep on. Her heart is iron in her breast." Okay, what is he doing? He's saying strange woman, He's not even referring to her as Penelope or my queen or my wife. He's like, oh, you strange woman, you are holding so aloof. You seem to be made of stone. Why are you being so cautious with me? And again, we have to read between the lines because what are we seeing here? Penelope comes in, Odysseus is in the chair before her. we have to assume, based on Odysseus's words, what is she doing? She is not doing what most of us would want to do with our long lost love, running up to him and just kind of like hugging him and just getting all the smooches and all this kind of stuff. But she's kind of like standing there, kind of looking at him, eyeing him a little bit more cautiously. And he's like, "What's up? What kind of behavior is this? You must be really made of stone, right? You must be really kind of stubborn. What's going on?" And I love this line here. He says, "Nurse, make up a bed for me to sleep on. I guess I'm sleeping on the couch tonight, right? We're not going to be able to have any kind of good reunion, I guess." Again, is he serious here? No, I think he's playing around with her a little bit. I think he's being a little bit kind of playful here. Now, he's being playful, but he's also asking the question, the kind of what's up? What's wrong? Kind of question. Now, look at Penelope's response. I love this. Penelope spoke to Odysseus now. She said, "Strange man, if man you are, this is no pride on my part, nor scorn for you, not even wonder merely. I know so well how he appeared boarding the ship for Troy, but all the same, dot, dot, dot. Make up his bed for him, Euryclea. Place it outside the bedchamber my lord built with his own hands." So what's going on here? Look at her words kind of in detail. Strange man, if man you are. So I love the relationship here. He goes, "Hey, strange woman." She goes, "Yeah, strange man." Like there's a little bit of equal rhetoric there in their teasing or in their kind of the game they're playing here. If man you are, what does that mean? That means she's wondering, are you even Odysseus? Are you even actually a man? She suspects that he might not be. She's not even sure if this is real, right? So she's also being kind of cautious here, right? So she's being kind of wise. I love this. She says, "I know how you or how he," again, kind of saying, if you're actually Odysseus, we're not totally sure yet. "How well I know exactly what Odysseus looked like when he went for Troy, but all the same, yeah, make up a bed for him, Euryclea. Place it outside the bedchamber my lord built with his own hands. Pile the big bed with fleeces, rugs, and sheets of purest linen." In other words, she's like, "Yeah, sure. Drag his bed out and make him sleep out here." So she's calling his bluff, right? He's like, "Yeah, I guess I'm gonna sleep on the couch tonight, or I'm gonna sleep somewhere else tonight." And she's like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, drag your bed out and why don't you go sleep out there?" So notice what happens here, though. I love the narrator. Um, it says what? So, da 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 da. Here we go. With this, she tried him to the breaking point. So, who breaks first in this little kind of playful game they're doing? He breaks first. He says, "What?" And he turned on her in a flash, raging, "Woman, by heaven, you stung me now. Who dared to move my bed? No builder had the skill for that, unless a god came down to turn the trick. No mortal in his best days could budge it with a crowbar. Here is our pact and pledge, our secret sign, built into that bed, my handiwork and no one else's. An old trunk of olive grew like a pillar on the building plot, and I laid out our bed round that tree, lined up the stone walls, built the walls and roof, gave it a doorway and smooth-fitting doors. Then I lopped off silvery leaves and branches, hewn and shaped that stump from the roots up into a bedpost, drilled it, let it serve as a model for the rest. I planned them all, inlaid them with silver, gold, and ivory, and stretched the bed between a pliant web of oxhide thongs dyed crimson. There's our sign. I know no more. Could someone else's hands have sawn the trunk and dragged the frame away? All right, so what did she basically do? She, as it says, tries him to the breaking point. And what was she doing here? You have to kind of know something about Odysseus's bedchamber of his bedroom and his bed that he's made for his wife. It was, as he just rants there, it was a bed. It's a beautiful image, by the way. We're going to talk about it in a minute. It was a bed that was made out of a growing olive tree. And out of that tree, he builds the frame of his bed while the tree's still in the earth, right? So it's growing out of there, and he builds this frame out of it. And then around that bed frame, or on that bed, he builds his bedroom. And around the bedroom, he builds the palace. And around the palace, thus the kingdom, right? So she, by saying, "Hey, why don't you just, drag his bed outside?" He's saying, "Yeah, no one can do that. It's my bed. Look at what I did," right? Um, so a couple things here before we get into the details. Number two, how are both Penelope and Odysseus testing each other in this scene? He's testing her to see if he can get her to kind of, break down and come give him a hug and come give him a kiss first. She is testing him to see if you really are even Odysseus, right? So he knows that that's Penelope. She doesn't know if it's actually Odysseus. Okay? So she tests him. And interestingly enough, for number three, how does Odysseus reveal about his bed that is so special? Like we just said, it's built a out of an olive tree. And again, that is in fact a secret that no one would have known except for Euryclea, the queen's maid here, because no one is supposed to be allowed inside the royal bedchamber except for the direct servant of both the king and the queen. So, or even just the queen usually sometimes. So for number three, what does Odysseus reveal about his bed that is so special? We just said that. Number four, what could the description of the bed be symbolic of here? What does it represent? So before we get into the fun kind of dynamic of their reactions here, or their romance here, what is with this image of the bed? Why is this also, again, one of those kind of top five most famous images from the Odyssey? Well, I love it because I usually teach my students that what you have here is a kind of mythic and not so fantastical symbol for how our lives should be constructed. You have, if we break it down, right, if we actually draw it out, you have a tree, okay, specifically an olive tree. Now, a couple things there. A tree, what's it a symbol of? A symbol of life, a symbol of growth. Great, life and growth at the heart of our kingdom, okay, this tree. It's an olive tree. A little bit of a reference to Athena, if you know your Greek mythology, that's her tree. Olives also tend to be symbolic of peace and kind of the wealth and the riches that you can have in the Mediterranean region. So all of that kind of stuff in that symbol as well. But what grows or what is crafted outside of the tree or from the tree? It's the bed, the marriage bed. And what happens in the marriage bed? It's where the marriage relationship is and the love of the marriage is consummated, in the sexual act, in a sexual relationship, in a romantic and loving relationship, right? And that is, along with the tree, at the heart of their life that they have built, right? It's the tree in the marriage bed, it's the bedroom in the kingdom, and then it's the kingdom and everyone else outside. In other words, Homer's kind of saying what? The foundation of your life is going to be this relationship, these relationships, these deeply intimate relationships that you create. And those things need to be steady and strong like a tree and producing life like a tree and functional. Because if they're not, notice the imagery there, it's the foundation. If it's not really kind of working, everything else is going to collapse. We'll come back to that in a minute because that's actually something we discussed way at the beginning before the Trojan War began. So, great symbol. We'll talk about it some more. Now, for number five, how does Odysseus reaction prove to Penelope that he is in fact the real Odysseus, right? So he breaks first, right? He loses his temper first. Again, showing us what? Yeah, he's grown a lot, but he's still got his little bits and flaws here. He's still got a bit of a temper. And we see that again, Penelope is a little bit, if not more patient, is definitely knows him better than maybe he knows her, right? So she knows like the buttons where to push for him, and she was basically testing him here too, because she's saying, "Hey, are you actually Odysseus? Because only Odysseus would know this secret of our bedchamber, right?" So he says all this, and the narrator continues. Their secret, as she heard it told, her knees grew tremulous and weak, her heart failed her. With eyes brimming tears, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck, and kissed him, murmuring, "Do not rage at me, Odysseus. No one ever matched your caution. Think how difficultly the gods gave I'm sorry, what difficulty the gods gave. They denied us life together in our prime flowering years, kept us from crossing into age together. Forgive me, don't be angry. I could not welcome you with love on sight. I armed myself so long ago against the frauds of men, impostors who might come, all those many who, I'm sorry, whose underhanded ways bring evil on. Okay, so what is Penelope's caution? How does her caution characterize here? So she realizes, okay, this is actually Odysseus. It is actually him. And she just breaks down. She's like, "Oh my God, like finally." So she has that release of emotion finally. And she tells him, "Hey, I'm sorry, but I had to check this. I had to be safe about this because I know people and gods, right, were kind of messing with us a little bit here. And I wanted to be cautious." Again, this shows her as very, very competent, very fitting couple or very fitting woman for Odysseus. So again, I think Homer is giving us a really kind of great image of what a relationship should ideally look like, where you guys are able to play on the same level. Okay, you're kind of equal in competence, right? It's not like the man is completely dominating the woman or kind of controlling her, or the woman is completely at another level than the man. It's like they're actually quite equal in their capacities, but they're just kind of also playing out the social and gender dynamics that they have to play out. So she says all this, "Forgive me, don't be angry." And then she gives this really interesting passage. Also, I love this line here that I highlighted. They, that is the gods, denied us life together in our prime and flowering years. It's a little bit of a lament of what we've talked about in other parts of this story, where they're 40 years old now, or at least he's 40 years old. And that means that he's lost like some of the prime parts of his life. He can still obviously be very very well, fit and full of life, but he's lost some really good years there at sea and all this kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of sadness there, a little bit of there is loss. It's not a complete happy ending, right? There is some bitterness here too. But look at what she says. Penelope continues on. Helen of Argos, daughter of Zeus and Leda, would she have joined the stranger, lain with him, if she had known her destiny? I know the Achaeans in arms would bring her back. I'm sorry, known the Achaeans in arms would bring her back to her own country. Surely a goddess moved her to adultery, her blood unchilled by war and evil coming. The years, the desolation, ours too. But here and now, what sign could be so clear as this, our own bed? No other man has ever laid eyes on it. Only my slave, my own slave. Actorus, that was my father, sent me as a gift. She kept our door. You make my stiff heart know that I am yours. Okay. So Penelope gives us kind of the last thematic lines of this poem. She says, "Did Helen understand or realize all of the suffering that was going to come from her decision?" Who are we talking about, by the way? Penelope is talking about Helen of Sparta or Argos or Troy, whatever name you want to grant to her. So Helen of Troy, the one who started, in some sense, the Trojan War, the girl who was taken away or went with Paris, and that's kind of what's actually being discussed here. Is did Helen go willingly? Did Paris kidnap her? Did Aphrodite bewitch her? Like what happened? Not all that interested in that. She's more kind of just saying what. Um, for number seven, what does Penelope reveal as the chief cause of the Trojan War and all the suffering surrounding it? It was the adultery, the dysfunctional behavior, the dysfunctional relationship that Helen exhibited, and also Paris exhibited, that sprung on the whole Trojan War. Okay. And look at the waves of suffering that kind of rippled out from that, including Penelope's suffering and her household suffering and her child's suffering and Odysseus' suffering. So it's a great image of the interconnectedness of our actions, right? Something we talked about with the Lotus Eaters, where your actions. The Greeks are definitely not libertarians, right? They don't think you can ever just live out your life however you want with no repercussions to anyone else. No, there's no such thing because you're connected to an entire system of everyone in this world. So everything you do or don't do is going to have immediate or very, very long-term ramifications and negative effects or positive effects on the world and the people around you. Okay, so great point there. Now, for number eight, how does this scene contrast the cause of the war? So she says all of this, right? She's like, all the bloodshed that was coming on from this mistake. But then she says this, but here and now, what sign could be so clear as this of our own bed? So there's a great contrast that she's creating here. She's like, yeah, Helen, with all the things that Helen did and all the suffering, but now you and I are here in our marriage bed together. So we have that contrast between the dysfunctional relationships of Helen and Paris and the functional, very, very loving a relationship between Odysseus and Penelope. How does she contrast it? Ours is much more healthy. Ours is much more, like the tree, life-giving and much more peaceful and much more moral, I think we could say as well. Okay. Now, the last part here. Now, from his breast into his eyes, the ache of longing mounted, and he wept at last. His dear wife, clear and faithful in his arms, longed for as the sun-warmed earth is longed for by a swimmer spent in rough water, where his ship went down under Poseidon's blows, gale winds and tons of sea. Few men can keep alive through a big surf to crawl clotted with brine I'm sorry, unkindly beaches enjoy knowing the abyss behind. And so she too rejoiced, her gaze upon her husband's, her white arms round him pressed as though forever. So the final simile here is of this man who is just dying to get, literally like dying and struggling to get onto land because he's been at sea and he's like drowning essentially in the dark abyss behind him. He's finally able to get on the sun-warmed, sandy land. And then what we have the image of Penelope holding him, pressing her arms around him as if forever. It's this beautiful, very Disney-esque image of kind of a happily forever after that these two give. So, how does this reveal how he's feeling? He feels saved. He feels fulfilled. He made it. He made it. After we are. After after what, three videos, several books, over 20 books, he's finally made it, and he gets his happy ending. He did it right. Okay. So, a couple things. We have like one quick little summary here, and then we're going to do the reflection questions and we'll call it a day. It reads, Odysseus and Penelope tell each other about all that happened to them while Odysseus was away. Then Odysseus visits his father Laertes to give him the good news of his safe return. Meanwhile, the townspeople, angry about the deaths of the young suitors, gather to fight Odysseus. In the end, Athena steps in and makes peace among them all. Okay, so the peace that was promised by Tiresias' prophecy does come to pass is, spread outward into the rest of Odysseus's land, and Athena is happy to do that because of how well Odysseus has conducted himself thus far. Now, we also, it's not listed out here, but it is obvious and noteworthy that Odysseus does give thanks and give offerings to Poseidon as well as Athena and Zeus for the role that they played in his journey home. And we have him, therefore, reaching the goal that he had desired to reach since that conversation with Tiresias. He does fulfill all three of the prophetic steps that he needs to fulfill that kind of ultimate goal of his life, which is to make it home and set up his, not perfect, but his set up his kind of happily ever after for himself and his family. And that's essentially how the story ends. All right. Now, the reflections. Number one, consider how Homer and the Greeks portray their female characters. What role do women have in these myths? Be sure to explain why some people may disagree with your answer. Right. So I've been discussing at least like three or four times, why the female characters in these Greek myths are so interesting and so unique among like our expectations at least of how we would imagine them to be portrayed, right? They're not simplistic, they're not dynamic in one way or the other. They're not, these amazing heroines that can do anything you want them to do, like Wonder Woman. They're not like, these meek and kind of just very sexist, kind of demeaned figures that are always beholden to men. They're not that. There's something in the middle, there's something dynamic about them. So explain, what are they like? Consider characters like Penelope, Circe, Calypso, Athena. And also, technically, you couldn't include Scylla and Charybdis because those are both feminine characters, right? So, what's up with all of these interesting female characters? Okay, how do you interpret them? And make sure you say, hey, this is how I'm interpreting them, but some people might interpret them a totally different way. So, if you think that it's a very, very sexist and demeaning portrayal of women, why might some people think that it's not? And if you think that it's not, if you think that it's actually a very, very good portrayal of women, why might people actually disagree with you and say, there's some negative depictions and interpretations to be had here too. For number two, in what way are the suitors the villains of the story, and what do they represent? What do they represent in our own lives? Okay, so classic, right? We have to bring it back to that major interpretation that we've been trying to carry through this whole story, which is how do we interpret the Odyssey as a metaphor for our experiences of life? And if we do, well, what are the suitors then? What do these guys represent as the villains? Okay. Now, for number three, how is the conclusion of the Odyssey more of a comedy than a tragedy? So kind of a new word. I usually teach this right at the or this genre term at the end of this unit. Tragedy, as we've discussed, is a story where fundamentally a character begins in a kind of a high position and ends in a very low position, ends in kind of a negative place, and has maybe some recognition or understanding as to why that happened to them. And it's generally a kind of a sad, if not very, very bittersweet ending. Well, with the Odyssey, we have kind of the opposite of a tragedy. We have what's called a comedy, not like a ha-ha, laughs and slapstick sort of comedy. Comedy means a story that ends in the opposite direction, where someone is in a bad state but ends in a much, much better state. Usually, comedies end with some sort of marriage imagery or marriage plot point. We definitely see that here with the Odyssey. So break that down, explain that, and how is this so much more of a comedy? How is this actually a happy ending? Okay. So that's the Odyssey. We are done reading it. I will probably put out one more, definitely briefer video, just kind of summarizing a lot of the points and a lot of the themes of this text for your own understanding and your own kind of recap, but also for preparation for the essay that I usually give for this particular unit. I do usually give just one essay on the Odyssey, and it's about the morals that Homer's trying to impart to us as readers. So I'll make a video for that one as well, and that should kind of guide you through the process of creating a thesis, writing a pretty good thesis for that particular essay. All right. That is the Odyssey. I hope you enjoyed it. People usually really do enjoy this story because it's quite happy, right? It's kind of a happy, fun adventure among a lot of usually very much more tragic stories in English. So, again, I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you again soon in the next video. Until then, have a wonderful, wonderful time. Bye.